Hey, dads, happy Father's Day. Only moms said that back to me, by the way. I'd be offended, but I'm about to use a passage that talks about gentleness and respect. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 13. Let me ask you some questions as you turn there. Why are you a Christian? If somebody were to ask you, if we're sitting down, if you're getting your hair cut, your favorite coffee place, favorite restaurant, you're coming out of church, you walk in, and it's clear, they just say, why are you a Christian? Why aren't you something else? Because there's more options. There's other things you could be doing with your time this morning. And somebody else might say, well, let me tell you why I'm not a Christian. And there's plenty of options. There's plenty of ways to answer that question. Maybe somebody says, well, in the camp of, well, why I'm not a Christian? Well, I only believe what can be scientifically proven. We actually kind of touched on that a little bit in our small group this morning. You know, science and faith don't really work together. Maybe somebody comes and they press you and they say, why do you believe the Bible? It's just a book. There's lots of other books. Of all these books, why would you live your life by that one? How do you know there's a God? I mean, the passage we're in, so here's the idea of 1 Peter. We're caught in between two worlds. We're caught in the immediate world of right here and now, and sometimes this place doesn't look very good. And then on the other side, it's the world where we just sang about it. I know how the story ends. There's hope. There's something else other than the immediate physical nature that we see around us. And here we are in the middle of that, and the picture of this passage we're looking at this morning is, hey, if the sky is falling, why are you whistling? Have you seen the news lately? Shouldn't you be a little bit more somber? That's kind of the essence of the passage. And so I would even ask you, if we're going to keep pushing on questions, a good question to ask is, how does being a Christian actually help you in your life? And then you could put it on the other side of that. You could say, morning, because it's just in the passage, is can you make a defense for what you believe? And you need to understand, everybody believes something. We use terms like believer and unbeliever, but everybody has some sort of belief structure in their life that they live by. And they just may not care to put it that way. So, okay, 1 Peter 3, verse 13 says this. It says, now who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Suffering and blessing are not exclusive to one another. And it says, have no fear of them, nor be troubled. But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy. Always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks for the reason for the hope that is in you. This is what we started off with. Can you say, give a reason for what you believe and why you believe it? And then it says, it doesn't finish there. It says, yet do it with gentleness and respect, because that time and today, it was known that there are going to be Christians who are going to give answers and be jerks about it in the process. I've done that far too many times than I care to admit. It says, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. So it's this picture of you're suffering, but you have hope. You have answers for this hope, even though you're suffering for good. And then it takes this turn in verse 18, and it looks at when you suffer, who do we look at? Man, let's look at Jesus. Verse 18 says, for Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous. Right? It's not playing with words here. Jesus is innocent, and we're not. And he's suffering for our unjustness, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but being made alive in the Spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers, having been subjected to him. Here in this passage, we see this. There is reason for hope in suffering instead of fear. Look at verse 13. 15. Click it. Perfect. But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be what? You will be blessed. It says, have no fear of them, nor be troubled. And then it says, here's the picture. Who is going to harm you? This passage is making this aim at you, is saying, what's the worst somebody could do to you? This is what it's trying to aim at. They can take all your money. They can take all your stuff. They can take your life. And the passage says, don't be afraid of them, and don't be troubled about it. If that's the worst that can happen to you, you need to see that you're pretty blessed. Because we have a source of hope and blessing in the Lord, and it's this picture. Jesus says, have no fear of those who can touch your body. Have fear of who can touch your soul. What is immaterial. So how do we do this? How do we live this out? How do we go with a reason for hope in the midst of suffering instead of fear? It's verse 15. It says to honor Christ above all. We fear him and have our eternity on our hearts. It settles our hearts. It fades our fears. It frames out all of our troubles. Whatever suffering might look like. I believe the suffering that they're talking about here isn't just run-of-the-mill, man, you're having a really rough go of things. It's people actually accusing you, slandering you. It's people making your life hard because you're a Christian. It's that specific in this. And so the picture here is that you're blessed even should you suffer. You're loved by God. You're favored by God. You are given so much by the Lord. But it doesn't stop there, and I really don't want to spend forever on this next point, is that we have a reason and defense for hope in a confused world. Right? The sky is falling, you're suffering, and so the picture here is you're suffering. People keep coming to you, and they're beating you up with their words. They're trying to take away your livelihood, maybe even your life. And they see that going on, and they're like, why don't you give up? Why don't you just stop being a Christian? Why don't you just go back to the way things were before, and your life would be better? And the passage is saying, no, it wouldn't. Because it says here, but in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy. And then it says to be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks for the reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do this with gentleness and respect. And I want to point out something in this passage. In the church, we want to give people answers. We stand up here and we go to class, we do all these things. We want to give them, hey, here are all the answers you want from the Bible. Here's what you need to know. That's not a bad thing. But this passage says something else. It says, but in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy. There's more than just having answers here. Many, countless people over the years have gained lots of answers from the Bible, about God, but they have not done this first part. Honored Christ the Lord as holy in their hearts. They get a bunch of answers and they live their life however they want. They have no appeal to please God. And so we see kids who learn lots of things, and maybe the answers weren't good enough for them. That's okay. But it's more than just a mind thing. It's our heart. And so this is how we prepare. We know Jesus. We honor Jesus. It's the richness of the gospel is ours in Jesus. It's our heart and mind. And the other part of this passage here is your answers matter, but so does your attitude. Nobody ever liked a know-it-all Christian, spouting off answer after answer, but is just a complete jerk. There's no room for smugness. In its place, there should be respect. As a believer, we aren't those who are known as forceful. We are known as those who are gentle. It's a fruit. It's a good thing. And so we make this defense, as it says in verse 16, with a good conscience. And so it's to make a defense. That word, defense there, if you've been in church long enough, you've probably heard this word called apologetics. The Greek word there is apologia. It just means to make a defense. And to have answers in the midst of these things. You can make a good defense and not have to be defensive at the same time. Unfortunately, a lot of Christians, when they get pressed, they just want to press back. Instead of having good answers, and that's sometimes when we get caught and we don't know what to say, what do? We just get really defensive. And we just kind of back up, and we just keep backing up and backing up and backing up. And we become defensive. Here's what we see here. Listen, our faith presented in the Bible is reasonable. It makes sense. It's not pie in the sky. Now, it looks foolishness to people who don't believe it. We should expect that. Let me show you what this looks like. I believe every person has to answer some questions. And people may not want to answer questions about life, about death. Sometimes we just want to put our head in the sand about things. Let me give you an example. So I've got these, what I call flashcards up here. The question being answered is the same in both sides. How did we get here? Why are there human beings? Why is there an economy? Why are there nations? And there's two ways you can approach this. And I'm making this very blanketed, but this is for somebody who really just say they don't believe, maybe they are labeled agnostic, or I even put in this term, just a secular humanist. Versus a biblical Christian. And I just didn't put down Christian, because there's a lot of people who claim to be Christians who really, they don't know their Bible, and they don't care to know their Bible. So here everybody's got to answer this question. How did we get here? How did we get here? Another way of putting it is, why is there something instead of nothing? So here's it's random chances. It's collisions that happen over time. Evolutionary processes. Actually, I just didn't really have enough room to put this down. People who really don't want to believe in creation and intelligent design, they prefer another answer. It's called an infinite universe. Because if you don't have an infinite universe, your universe had to have a starting point. And there's been this general thought for a long time that the general starting point of the universe, some people call it a Big Bang. And people who don't really want to go after intelligent design and creation, they don't really like that idea of a Big Bang because that sounds a lot like Genesis 1. And I would argue it does. A Big Bang has to have a Big Banger. Biblical Christian. How do we get here? God created everyone and everything. And here's the other piece. God created everyone equally. Now, have Christians always done a really good job of upholding that equally part? No. Unfortunately not. But if you're going to make the argument that everybody's created equal and you're going to believe in evolution, those two things don't go together. There has to be a reason everybody's created equal. There has to be a basis for that, other than we should just be generally good to one another. Those things break down over time. And again, some of these are pretty blanketed. I just don't have time to go really far into this. Here's another one that gets brought up a lot. Why is there evil? It gets phrased this way. If there is a good God, why is there death, disease, destruction, and all the bad things that are just made it in the last 5 minutes of the news and are just going to keep cycling over and over and over again on the news? Why is there evil? I would ask back, and I'd say, why is there good? More and more, I hear this. Evil is a religious construct. It's a way of showing, well, there's good and there's bad. Some of the leading atheists, and again, I didn't put atheist up here because atheist is just not a popular term. It's a popular term maybe in our camp, but a lot of even leading atheists don't want to be called that. And I'm okay to call them on their terms. I'm totally okay with that. Evil is a religious construct, and so a lot of the leading atheists, and when I say leading atheists, they've written a lot of books. They probably have a lot of YouTube and stuff like that. I think of them as authors, and I can tell you names, stuff like that, and goodness, I'm probably only familiar with the authors from 20 years ago. I'm probably less familiar with people in our present time. And it's this. Well, people are just a result of uncontrollable circumstances. Nobody can determine what home they're going to be born into and the type of values that are going to be put there. And so you think about how accident breeds this over on the creation side of things. Well, now accident and circumstance have bred whatever's come about in people. And so there's this question of, should we hold people accountable because they grew up on the wrong side of town and maybe in a less than ideal family and less than ideal circumstances, and they got, as far as the economy goes, the bottom end of the straw, and they maybe didn't get a straw at all? Why is there evil? And so to that I say, why is there good? How do you know the difference between what is good and what is evil in general? And then the simple question is, Genesis 3, sin and free will. I got two more. What is life's meaning? I genuinely don't think most people probably don't care, hey, how did we get here? Why is there evil? Most people care about this, but they're not going to phrase it maybe in life's meaning. It's going to be, hey, what's important to you? What makes you happy? What makes you feel good about yourself? And then what do we do with those things? Well, we run after them. Sometimes that's our hobby, it's our latest hobby. We run after it for a year or two, or maybe our whole lifetime, because we want to fill ourselves up with the things that make us feel good. And sometimes, I would say by the grace of God, people find a career that they just love. And they throw themselves into it, and they find meaning and value in that because it makes them feel good. People are looking for this. This is why, if you ever met a 20-year-old, 25-year-old, 30-year-old, and they're just like, I just don't really know what I want to do with my life. They're asking this question, they're just not using these words. I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. It just doesn't really bring me what I was hoping to get. Anyways, sorry. I'll keep going. So to the agnostic, to the secular humanist, to this side, there's lots of, here's the thing, there's lots of answers to these questions. It might be figure it out. Existentialism is kind of that. You exist, find out why you exist, and when you find that out. Today, the narrative of today is you find it within. When you find narrators call it things like your spark, your soul's energy. Just different things. And it's because we're in such an individualized society, instead of finding it, whereas 100 years ago or 200 years ago, you would have found it in your family, you would have found it in a tribe of bringing betterment to the culture and the community that you're in. Now it's just individualized. Or what is it? Maslow, his hierarchy of needs, to reach your potential, to reach your greatest potential, which sounds really good until you realize what your potential actually is. Like, my potential to be a professional football player was never great. What do you do with a short, slow, wimpy dude? You go out for the golf team. So this idea of reaching potential, it sounds really good in essence, but in practice, it's really hard. Because what do? We look around, and I realize, well, I'm never going to be Travis Kelce. And within me, I think I should be Travis Kelce. And every soul in this room says, that's a really bad idea, Pastor. And so I play golf. And then more recently, on this side of the flashcard is, there's really no need for meaning. And that's kind of what's been said, but as much as that's said, without using those words, people are still like, but I want to know that I value. I want to know that what I do matters. I want to know that when I die and I go to dust, something I have done will last. I would argue this is why people want to put their names on buildings. So that when they're gone, people will have to look at that name and be forced to remember them in some way. What is life's meaning? It's pretty simple as a believer. To know God, to love God, to glorify God, and enjoy Him forever. I say it's pretty simple. That's 4 things. But they're really all just kind of wrapped up in one. What happens after death? And this is probably the one that most people want to stick their head in the sand about. And I don't blame you. I'm weird. I ask questions to people. I was like, hey, what songs do you want played at your funeral? And people are like, that is the worst conversation starter ever. And I said, no, why? Why is that weird? And they're like, it's weird. I go, no, it's not. You're going to die, and there's going to be something. You don't want to think about that? No, I don't really want to think about that. Okay, that's fair. but you really kind of do. Anyways, what happens after death? Answers vary so much, but it ultimately comes down to this. If honest, absolutely nothing at all. Because if all that matters and all that is real and true is material, then nothing happens after death. But as a believer, as people who adhere to the Bible, we believe that people have a soul. And your soul goes on forever. And to either be present with the Lord or judged in hell. And so somebody might push back and say, well, I don't believe that. Well, man, I started to go down a rabbit hole of just to this other side of the card, the agnostic, the secular humanist, say, well, I don't believe in souls. I don't believe in one mystery. Well, there's this whole science going on right now where they're trying to explore what consciousness is. That there's an inner person with answers and memories and feelings. And all of a sudden, it's like, well, I can't quite pinpoint that with what is material. And it's a problem. Because it doesn't matter what you believe. Everybody has end-of-life scenarios that play out in their mind. They have these, what are called near-death experiences. And near-death experiences don't care if you grew up Buddhist, if you grew up Christian, or if you grew up agnostic. Everybody has these, and there's really no explaining them. Well, I would argue there is explaining them, but anyways. Answers. This is the way I perceive these things. You guys ever play this game? Guess who? Hey, does you get a character, you put it in, you say, hey, does your person have hair? Or are they bald? Do they have facial hair? And I try to, okay, here's the hack. You try to combine as many questions into one question as possible. And if maybe the person you're playing was like, hey, that's actually 3 questions. It's like, no, it wasn't, it was 1. You ask all these questions. This is the way I think about this. I come in and go, why is there something instead of nothing? And so I look and I look and all there's creation myths more than we can count. But how do those creation myths hold up, or non-creation myths? Like, how did the universe come into being? Was it a Big Bang? Is it an infinite universe? An infinite universe doesn't explain that our universe is constantly expanding. So some people are like, well, it expands and contracts, and it just keeps going like this, and it yo-yos and rubber bands. And it doesn't explain why the sun is only a certain age, all these kinds of things. And so I come over here and I go, well, that's not a very good answer. And so I just knock it down. And I come over and I ask the next question. Why am I the way I am? Why do I think the way I think? Why do we have a soul? Why is there something immaterial in this world? And so, I mean, if you're going to go the logical conclusion, why is there love and beauty? Well, on one side, it's chemicals. When you look at this art, when you hear this music, the chemicals are released in your body and it just gives you the tingles. Or maybe there's a God who made beauty. And so when a cello is played in just the right way, it resonates to your very being. And so I knock down a few more things. And in my life, this is the game I've been playing for 44 years. Because this is the way I'm wired, is to ask lots of questions. And I didn't grow up the way you grew up. I got presented with these questions earlier. So this is how I operate. And this is how I believe everybody. You don't have to operate this way. Listen, you don't have to play an eternal game of Guess Who. Please don't be weird like me. But you do have to have answers, period. It's not just Christians and people who have a Bible who have to answer really hard questions. But that's kind of how it gets presented. Half of people want to know, regardless of what they believe, does life have meaning? And if so, what is it? Half. And I would say some other people are lying. Almost that same number wants to know what happens after we die. Here's what this passage is showing us. A suffering person without the Lord has zero hope. I would say the secular humanist who says man is the highest good and to reach man's potential is the highest goal, in the midst of suffering, who does it all rise and fall on? It rises on the highest good and the highest goal. It rises and falls on you. You're on your own, buddy. We all have to answer these questions. Why do you believe fill in the blank? Everybody has to answer those things, not just people of the faith, not just people of the Bible. Everybody believes something. Here's a question I like to ask people, and I learned it from a book. When somebody makes any kind of claim, a good question is to ask and say, how did you come to that conclusion? And unfortunately, it's a better question every day because there are some wild things on the internet, y'all. When I say wild, I mean like ridiculous things. And so a really unoffensive way to just push back against that is to say, oh, that's really interesting. How did you come to that conclusion? Well, I watched this video. Uh-huh. Or here's how it works. I heard from somebody who heard from somebody who heard from somebody else. Uh-huh. I'm playing Guess Who in my head through this conversation. Man, that's not reasonable. We have to be careful. We have to be very careful. Christopher Hitchens is a leading atheist, or at least he was when I read a lot more about these things 20 years ago. He says this: exceptional claims demand exceptional evidence. And I would say, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. He's pointing that towards you and me. He's pointing that to people who have a Bible and want to believe there's a God who made everything and set everything in order and who interacts in our day-to-day life. And to Christopher Hitchens, I would say, what are the origins of DNA? What are the origins of the planet and the universe? I don't think it was Christopher Hitchens. I think it was actually Richard Dawkins. I talked about this in class just a second ago. That because things have come so far and we know so much more about the human body and cells and DNA than we ever have in the existence of the world, things are getting a little trickier if you don't believe in an intelligent designer. And so I think it's Richard Dawkins who said, well, DNA, because they don't know. It's hard. Well, DNA may have been sent by an alien race and put onto our planet. This is a real thing. It's called seed theory. Richard Dawkins is a very, very smart man who's probably, well, he hasn't written more books than I've read, but anyways, you get the idea. And when I first read that, I go, so you would rather believe that Superman came and put DNA on this planet than maybe, just maybe, there's a God? Some kind of intelligent designer? You'd rather believe in all the accidents. We want to be prepared to give a reason for the hope that is in us. And we want to do it, here's the thing, here's the kicker, with gentleness and respect. Our faith is reasonable. It's reasonable. You say, well, Pastor, why do you believe? I would say because it's true. Ultimately, you shouldn't, I don't want you basing anything on what does Pastor say. I want you fishing for the truth. I want you digging. I want you thinking. I believe we have a thinking faith. I do not believe it is unreasonable at all. Because it's true. That which I can see and that which I cannot see both help explain the things that I see in this world that I experience. Specifically, the Bible. Last point. Our hope is settled in the resurrected Jesus. This is what it's getting at. It says, for Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. Listen, we have a reason for hope, and the resurrection is the greatest one. Our salvation, that you can be saved from your sin. Our baptism, which is a physical picture of being saved from sin. Our proclamation of all these things, they ultimately all appeal to the resurrection hope. All of it. That there is something, there is someone greater than evil, greater than suffering, and greater than sin. There is hope in that. And listen, when I use the word hope, we all hope in things. Some people hope in the stock market. Some people hope in, I joke that, when you're in a drought for a long time, the person who owns an umbrella is a person of faith and hope. Hope is faith, but it's faith that is fueled by a future reality, not wishful thinking. I hope that my Oklahoma Sooners are going to win the College World Series. I have no reason for that hope because I don't know anything about baseball. Okay, I know a little bit about baseball. But I have hope in that. Well, your hope isn't that great. What is your hope based on? A lot of what people claim as hope is just optimism. It's just wishful thinking. I hope the housing market's going to turn around. I hope the economy is going to turn around. I hope it's going to rain. Now, when the meteorologist comes on the news at, what time yesterday? At 5 o'clock, and they're saying, hey, it's raining cats and dogs in southwest Nebraska, and it's heading southeast. I go, I better put up the mower. I might want to not have things that are going to blow around in the yard. All of a sudden, my hope has some reality attached to it. I believe that's what we see from God. It's faith that is fueled by a future reality. What we see because of Jesus is that suffering is not the end. The picture that's being used here is really odd. It's like you're being carried like the ark. And what did the ark carry people through? It carried them through judgment. And so what does Jesus do? He carries through judgment. And so what's being said in this passage is that there's an appeal to Christ that would mean that suffering might not be the end. And then here's the thing. Suffering might be in the cards for you. Suffering might not be in the cards, they might be in your hand. And for that, I hurt. I'm truly sorry. But this passage in verse 17 it talks about suffering. It says, if that should be God's will for you. It's saying Jesus suffered. It's saying suffering's not the end. It's saying there's hope that goes beyond suffering. That we're blessed even in the midst of suffering. Because there is more than just the immediate. There's more than just this life. There is more than what your eye currently sees. Remember, hope is faith that is fueled by a future reality. I see Stephen. He's often called the first Christian martyr because as you're going through the book of Acts, I would argue and I would say that's John the Baptist. That's okay. And then you have to do Jesus, and then Stephen. And Stephen, they come and they're like, hey, why do you believe this? Why don't you just go back to Judaism and leave this Jesus guy behind? And he's like, I can't. All the cards are stacked in favor of pointing at Jesus. And then he goes on this really long sermon. Amen. And he walks through the Old Testament, and he's pointing through the Old Testament. He's pointing everything at Jesus. He's like, that's about Jesus, that's about Jesus, that's about Jesus. He's going and going. And then in the midst of that, they're like, we don't like your answers. And so literally, they're taking off their cloaks. They're picking up stones to beat him for the name of Jesus. And in the midst of that, he's crying out and saying, God, forgive them. And his face is shining like an angel. And he is being faced with the reality that there's a God, and as the skies open, as Jesus is standing and speaking, that they're pleased with Stephen. What about you? When the cards are stacked against you, what's your hope? Is it you'll just get some different cards? Are the cards all an accident? Is there a dealer? Is your life, man, I just got to do the best I can with the hand I've been given. Amen. But that's not what a Christian believes. A Christian believes I'm going to walk with the cards that I've been dealt into my hand, but I'm going to fix my eyes on Jesus because that's where I'm going. That's my aim. That's the author and the founder of my whole life, my whole very being. And whatever cards come into my hand, because I have this God who loves me, who died for me, who cares for me, I can handle whatever's been put in my hand because he's handled it better. Do you have hope? If you say you have hope, what is the basis for your hope? Is it a reality, or is it based on accidents and your circumstances? Do you have a heart that honors Christ? The picture in this passage of it's suffering, bookmarked by suffering, and in the midst of suffering, I just want to honor Jesus. And that reframes suffering. I mean, if we be honest, when we suffer, for whatever reason, our favorite, our most natural thing to do is, I'm going to complain about it. And after my family's tired of hearing about it, I'm going to tell the internet about it. And when the internet's tired of hearing about it, we double down. Do you have a heart that honors Christ? Like really, truly honors Christ? And then, do you have a reasonable defense for the good news? Somebody comes up, they press you on it. Listen, I'm saying reasonable proof. I don't believe there are slam dunks. I don't believe there are walk-off home runs and be like, well, you've never heard this argument for Jesus before. Woo. I just don't believe those things. That's why I play Guess Who. We're going to get there. I want to show you how. But do you have any defense? Or have you just put yourself in this world, in this bubble? It's like, well, I don't know. Everybody I know just believes the same things I do. And I would press you and say, they probably don't. Will you take a moment and pray with me? Will you just in your seats talk to God about your hope? And will you just maybe have this conversation with God and say, God, where does my hope rest? Maybe you realize your hope rests on making sure you've got just enough in the bank. Maybe your hope rests on how healthy you are, and maybe you've been questioning that lately. Maybe you're like a lot of people, and your hope has been on how good you think you can be. You get around the wrong person, even that tests you. Will you ask Jesus to help you settle your hope in him? To honor him with your mind and your heart? To be diligent? To have reasonable answers and proofs for people? And will you just thank God for blessing you? For suffering in your place? For sprouting life where we sowed death? Father God, you're so good. God, when I doubt, thank you for my doubts. Thank you for faith. Thank you for answers. Thank you for revealing yourself over and over and over again, not just to me, but to so many others. Jesus, thank you for the blessing that comes through you. Thank you for giving life where I brought death. God, thank you for a hope and a future. And so, God, I pray that we would hope in you. We would rejoice in you. We would be strengthened by you and for you. God, stir in our minds and our hearts that we wouldn't be an ignorant people, but we would be a thinking, reasonable people. But we would also be the champions of respect. No matter the idea that gets floated our way about the origins of the universe or something else, God. Jesus, thank you. You're so good to us. Amen. I'm going to ask the musicians to come up. We're going to sing a song of response. I'm going to be the back over there. Butch is going to be in the back over here. If you need prayer, maybe you're here and you're just like, hey, I've never thought about it that way before. I want to put my hope in Jesus. I